The gravel crunched beneath my rental car's tires as I pulled into the circular drive of the Bella Vista Estate. Through my windshield, I could see the sprawling vineyards stretching toward the horizon, their neat rows catching the afternoon light like golden threads. This was Chloe's dream venue, a historic Napa Valley estate where celebrities married and fortunes were celebrated. Of course it was. I sat for a moment, watching the parade of luxury SUVs and gleaming sedans discharge their passengers. Designer handbags, tailored suits, and the kind of confident laughter that comes from never questioning whether you belong. My Honda Civic looked like a lost tourist among the Porsches and Bentleys. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out and straightened my navy suit, the same one I'd worn to law school graduation 3 years ago. It still fit, but compared to the Italian wool and custom tailoring around me, it felt like wearing a costume to the wrong party. "Ethan!" Chloe's voice cut through the estate's orchestrated chaos. She appeared in a whirlwind of ivory silk and nervous energy, her bridal party trailing behind like elegant ducklings. "You made it!" Her hug was brief but genuine, lasting just long enough for me to catch the scent of her perfume, something expensive that our mother had probably chosen. Before I could respond, she was whisked away by a woman with a clipboard, and the kind of militant efficiency that only comes with a 5-figure wedding planning fee. "Well, look who decided to show up." Aunt Lillian's voice carried the warmth of shared secrets and childhood memories. She was the only relative who still hugged me like she meant it. "You look handsome, sweetheart, though I keep waiting for you to bring someone special to these things." I managed to smile. "Still working on that, Aunt Lil." "At your age, your father was already married with 2 kids, she said, her tone gentle but pointed. "Not that there's anything wrong with taking your time, of course." Over her shoulder, I caught sight of my parents near the estate's main entrance. Mother stood with her spine rigid, directing traffic with the precision of a conductor, while Father nodded approvingly at something Graham's father was saying. They looked like they belonged here, like they'd been born into this world of casual extravagance. When Mother's eyes found mine across the courtyard, her smile was the kind reserved for distant acquaintances, polite but fleeting. She whispered something to Father, who glanced my way with the expression of someone trying to place a vaguely familiar face. "The family image," I heard Mother say to another guest, "is so important at these occasions. We want everything to be perfect for Chloe." I understood. I was a variable in her equation, unpredictable, uncontrollable, and therefore dangerous to the carefully constructed narrative of success she'd spent years building. The afternoon stretched ahead like a performance I hadn't been given lines for. The cocktail hour began with the gentle clink of champagne flutes and the kind of polished conversation that flows like rehearsed lines. I found myself gravitating toward the edges of clusters, close enough to appear social but far enough to remain unnoticed. It was a skill I'd perfected over years of family gatherings. "Excuse me, are you with the catering staff?" A groomsman in a perfectly pressed tuxedo approached, holding an empty glass. "Could you point me toward the bar?" I gestured toward the marble-top station near the terrace. "Just over there." He nodded his thanks and disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing alone with the realization that I'd been mistaken for hired help at my own sister's wedding. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd helped pay for the very champagne he was seeking. Across the courtyard, I spotted Mother holding court with Graham's family, her voice carrying on the evening breeze. "Oh, Chloe has always been our little star," she was saying, her laugh bright and practiced. "And our son Ethan? Well, he's the quiet one. Never quite figured out what he wants to do with his life." The words hit like a familiar bruise, tender from years of similar comments. I watched Graham's mother nod politely, her smile strained with the discomfort of witnessing someone else's family dynamics. Father joined the conversation, his chest puffed with pride. "Now my nephew Ryan, Charles's boy from Chicago, he's making real waves in venture capital. Just closed a $50 million deal last month." He paused, glancing in my direction. "Some people are born for success, you know. Others take a little longer to find their way. Quote, the dismissal in his tone was so casual, so practiced, that I wondered if he even realized he was doing it. I'd become the family's cautionary tale, the example of what happens when you don't follow the prescribed path. Ethan? A photographer approached with a professional smile. We're doing family photos now. Could you step back a bit? We want to keep the focus on the immediate family. I moved aside, watching as they arranged my parents, Chloe and Graham, in the perfect formation. The photographer snapped away, capturing the moment that would hang in their homes for years to come. I stood just outside the frame, close enough to see but too far to be included. Chloe's eyes found mine over the photographer's shoulder. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But then Mother placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding her attention back to the camera, and the moment passed. The sun was beginning to set, painting the vineyard in shades of gold and amber. Around me, conversations flowed about stock options and country club memberships, about children in elite schools and vacation homes in the Hamptons. I listened to their world, understanding every reference but belonging to none of it. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, on my way. Myvriv LB. I stared at the screen, trying to place the initials, when another groomsman bumped into me. Sorry, buddy, he said, barely glancing up. Great party, isn't it? I found refuge in a quiet corner of the estate's stone courtyard, away from the orchestrated merriment. The fountain beside me bubbled softly, its sound mixing with distant laughter and the gentle hum of string quartet music. I held a glass of sparkling water, watching the bubbles rise and burst, a fitting metaphor for my place in this family. The familiar ache in my chest transported me back to another celebration, years ago. I was 17, standing in our family's living room, holding a bronze trophy that felt heavier than it should have. The regional debate championship, months of preparation, countless hours of research, and a final round that left my hands shaking with exhaustion and triumph. Dad, look what I won, I had said, my voice still hoarse from 3 days of competition. Father barely glanced up from his newspaper. Debate, huh? That's nice, son. Real success is in numbers, not words. Remember that when you're choosing a career. Quote, the trophy had ended up on a shelf in my bedroom, gathering dust, while Chloe's participation ribbons from art camp covered the refrigerator like medals of honor. She'd been 12 then, painting watercolor flowers while I dissected constitutional law. But somehow her creative pursuits warranted celebration while my academic achievements were dismissed as hobbies. The pattern continued through high school. When I earned a full scholarship to State College, Mother's response was a distracted nod and a reminder not to embarrass the family with my scholarship kid status. When Chloe got accepted to an expensive private art school, they threw a dinner party. I remembered my freshman year dorm room, a cramped space I'd learned to call home because it felt more welcoming than the house I'd grown up in. The walls were bare except for a single photo of Chloe and me as kids, building sandcastles on a beach vacation. We'd been conspirators then, united against bedtime and vegetables, whispering secrets under blankets. The memory was interrupted by a text from Mother that arrived the night before Parents' Weekend. Don't embarrass us, remember who you represent. I'd stared at that message for an hour, trying to decode what she meant. Was my existence itself embarrassing? My choice of school? My second-hand clothes? I'd never figured it out, but I'd spent the entire weekend walking on eggshells, monitoring every word, every gesture, every breath. That was the weekend I decided to study law, not corporate law, where the money was, but public interest law, the kind that helped people who couldn't help themselves. If I was going to disappoint them anyway, I might as well do it while making a difference. The decision had created a chasm between us that widened with each passing year. They wanted a son who fit their mold, and I wanted a family who loved me for who I was, not who they thought I should become. Now, sitting in this vineyard paradise, I realized we'd both been chasing impossible dreams. A gentle breeze stirred the napkins on nearby tables, and I pulled out my phone to check the time. The ceremony would begin soon, and I still hadn't figured out where I was supposed to sit. The wedding coordinator's voice cut through the courtyard chatter like a conductor's baton. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for the ceremony." Quote, I watched the elegant migration toward the vineyard's ceremonial lawn, where white chairs arranged in perfect rows faced a flower-draped arbor. The late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light, transforming the scene into something from a fairy tale. Chloe had always believed in fairy tales. Following the crowd, I found myself naturally drifting toward the back rows, but an usher in a crisp navy suit intercepted me. "Excuse me, sir, are you immediate family?" "I'm the bride's brother," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. He consulted his clipboard, frowning. "I don't see you on the family seating chart." "Let me check with the coordinator." I watched him hurry away, clipboard in hand, while guests streamed past me toward their assigned seats. The first few rows were marked with small cards, reserved for family. I could see mother and father settling into the front row, their profiles regal against the backdrop of climbing roses. "Sir?" The usher returned, his professional smile slightly strained. "There seems to be some confusion. The family section is full, but we have a lovely seat for you in the back. Great view of everything." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The back row. At my sister's wedding, the irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. I settled into my assigned chair, surrounded by distant relatives and family friends who nodded politely but didn't quite know where to place me. The woman beside me, an elderly aunt from Graham's side, leaned over with a conspiratorial whisper. "Are you a friend of the groom's?" she asked, her voice kind but curious. "Brother of the bride," I replied quietly. Her eyebrows rose in surprise, but before she could respond, the string quartet began the processional. All heads turned toward the estate's main entrance, where the wedding party would emerge. Chloe appeared at the far end of the aisle, her arm linked with father's. Even from this distance, I could see her radiant smile, the way she seemed to float rather than walk. She was beautiful in the way that made time pause, made cameras flash, made everyone forget to breathe. But I noticed something else, a tightness around her eyes, a slight tremor in her hand as she gripped father's arm. She was nervous, or maybe conflicted. I'd seen that look before, during childhood moments when she was torn between what she wanted and what was expected. As they drew closer, her eyes swept the crowd, and for just a moment, they found mine. The distance between us seemed to collapse, and I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd made me promise to dance with her at her wedding. I smiled and gave her the smallest nod. She blinked, and something shifted in her expression, a flicker of recognition, maybe even regret. Then father was placing her hand in Graham's, and the moment passed. The minister began speaking about love and commitment, about the bonds that tie families together. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the envelope I'd brought, a handwritten letter I'd stayed up all night crafting, filled with childhood memories and hopes for her future. The ceremony continued around me, beautiful and distant as a movie I was watching from the wrong theater. The reception flowed seamlessly from ceremony to celebration, guests moving like a well-choreographed dance from the vineyard lawn to the estate's grand terrace. Crystal chandeliers hung from ancient oak trees, and tables draped in ivory silk created intimate islands of conversation beneath the darkening sky. I found myself at a table near the edge of the reception area, seated with Graham's college friends and their wives, pleasant people who made polite conversation about real estate markets and weekend getaways. They were kind enough to include me, though I could sense their curiosity about why the bride's brother was relegated to the outer circle. The evening progressed through courses of locally sourced cuisine and carefully curated wines. I was beginning to think I might make it through the night without incident when Mother approached our table, her smile sharp as crystal. "Ethan, darling," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to draw attention, "we're about to begin the toasts. "I thought it would be lovely if you said a few words about Chloe." The request felt like a trap, but saying no would create exactly the kind of scene Mother despised. I followed her to the makeshift stage area, where a microphone waited like an instrument of judgment. The wedding coordinator handed me the mic with an encouraging smile. "Just speak from the heart," she whispered. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces, the soft glow of string lights reflecting in champagne glasses. Chloe sat at the head table, her eyes wide with something that might have been concern. "I've had the privilege of knowing Chloe her entire life," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "She's always been the light in any room she enters, the kind of person who makes you believe in magic. Graham, you're getting someone who will fill your life with laughter, creativity, and enough artistic projects to redecorate your house monthly." A gentle wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. Chloe smiled, her first genuine expression I'd seen all day. "I wish you both every happiness," I concluded, raising my water glass, to Chloe and Graham. The applause was warm, appreciative. For a moment, I felt like I belonged. Then Mother took the microphone. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her smile radiating false warmth. "You know, he's always been good with words, much better than he is with practical matters like career planning or financial responsibility." The crowd chuckled uncertainly. "At least someone in the family appreciates his talents, even if the rest of us are still waiting for him to figure out what he wants to be when he grows up." The laughter that followed felt different, awkward, embarrassed. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as Father stepped forward to add his own commentary. "That's our Ethan," he said with the jovial tone that made cruelty sound like affection. "Still working on that whole success thing. Good thing the family doesn't rely on him for much beyond entertainment." The words hit like physical blows. Around me, guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some studying their wine glasses with sudden intensity. Aunt Lillian looked mortified, her hand pressed to her chest. I handed back the microphone without another word and walked away from the spotlight, my parents' laughter trailing behind me like smoke. I was halfway across the terrace, my jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth, when the sound of gravel crunching under expensive tires made me pause. Through the estate's elaborate entrance, a sleek, black Mercedes pulled into the circular drive with the kind of understated authority that commanded attention. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman who seemed to carry the weight of courtrooms and constitutional law in her bearing. Judge Lorraine Bennett was smaller than her reputation suggested, but her presence filled spaces in ways that had nothing to do with physical stature. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her navy dress spoke of power without ostentation. I stopped walking. I hadn't expected her to come. The wedding coordinator rushed forward with the frazzled energy of someone trying to accommodate an unexpected VIP. "Welcome! Are you with the bride's family or the groom's?" "Neither," Judge Bennett replied, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to being heard in large rooms. "I'm here for Ethan." My name seemed to echo across the terrace, causing conversations to pause mid-sentence. Mother appeared at the judge's elbow, with the speed of someone who smelled opportunity, her hostess' smile blazing at full wattage. "How wonderful to meet you," Mother gushed, extending her hand. "I'm Marianne, Chloe's mother. Any friend of the family is welcome here, though I'm afraid I don't recall." "Ethan!" Judge Bennett's voice cut through Mother's introduction like a gavel through noise. She spotted me across the terrace and began walking in my direction, her stride purposeful and unwavering. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a clear path between us. I felt dozens of eyes tracking her movement, trying to place this authoritative stranger who clearly knew the family disappointment by name. When she reached me, she didn't hesitate. Her arms wrapped around me in the kind of embrace reserved for people who'd fought battles together, who'd shared late nights and impossible deadlines, and the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear clearly. "I couldn't miss the wedding of my most brilliant co-counsel." The word co-counsel rippled through the gathering like a stone dropped in still water. I saw Graham's father lean forward with sudden interest. Several guests exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from polite confusion to genuine curiosity. "Lorraine," I managed, my voice rough with emotion I hadn't expected. "You didn't have to." "Nonsense," she interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "When someone spends 2 years of their life crafting legal frameworks that protect whistleblowers in federal fraud cases, the least their mentor can do is show up for their sister's wedding." The silence that followed was profound. Even the string quartet seemed to pause between notes. Mother's face had gone through several expressions before settling on something between confusion and alarm. Father materialized beside her, his confident bearing wavering as he tried to process what he'd just heard. Chloe stared from the head table, her champagne flute frozen halfway to her lips. Judge Bennett smiled at the gathering, her expression serene as a cat with particularly satisfying prey. "Now," she said pleasantly, "I believe someone mentioned cake?" The wedding coordinator, clearly sensing an opportunity to elevate the evening's prestige, approached Judge Bennett with the reverence typically reserved for Supreme Court justices. "Your Honor, would you perhaps honor us with a few words? I'm sure our guests would be thrilled to hear from someone of your stature." I felt panic rise in my throat. "Lorraine, you don't need to." She placed a gentle but firm hand on my arm, the same gesture she'd used during our late-night strategy sessions when I doubted whether our work would make any difference. "It would be my pleasure." The microphone was quickly procured, and guests gravitated toward the makeshift stage area like moths to flame. Mother and father positioned themselves prominently in the front, their faces wearing expressions of forced enthusiasm masking deep confusion. Judge Bennett took the microphone with the natural authority of someone who'd addressed packed courtrooms and congressional committees. When she spoke, her voice carried across the vineyard with crystalline clarity. "Good evening. I'm Judge Lorraine Bennett of the Federal District Court for the Northern District of California." A murmur of recognition rippled through the crowd. Several guests clearly knew the weight that title carried. "I'm here tonight because I had the extraordinary privilege of working with one of the finest legal minds I've encountered in 30 years on the bench." She paused, letting her eyes find mine across the crowd. Ethan spent 2 years of his life crafting the legal framework that enabled one of the largest corporate fraud prosecutions in federal history. The Meridian Financial case, perhaps you read about it in the Wall Street Journal, resulted in the recovery of over $3 billion stolen from pension funds and retirement accounts. The silence was absolute. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. "What the newspapers didn't report," she continued, "was that the entire whistleblower protection protocol that made that case possible was architected by the young man standing there. His work didn't just help convict criminals. It created legal precedents that will protect truth-tellers for generations." Graham's father leaned forward, his mouth slightly agape. I could see him making rapid mental calculations, trying to reconcile this information with the family disappointment narrative he'd been fed. Ethan chose to work behind the scenes, refusing interviews, declining recognition, because he believed the work mattered more than the credit. That kind of integrity. She shook her head, her voice carrying a note of profound respect. "It's rarer than diamonds in Washington." Chloe was crying now, tears streaming down her carefully made-up cheeks. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since we were children, pure admiration, untainted by years of familial programming. "But tonight isn't about legal victories," Judge Bennett concluded, her tone warming. "It's about celebrating love and family. Chloe, you're fortunate to have a brother who understands that true success isn't measured in headlines or bank accounts, but in the quiet knowledge that your work makes the world a little more just." She raised her champagne glass. "To integrity, to justice, and to the kind of love that doesn't need applause to know its worth." The toast that followed was thunderous, but I barely heard it over the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. The applause was still echoing across the terrace when Mother's fingers closed around my wrist like a vice. Her smile remained perfectly intact for the benefit of watching guests, but her grip promised consequences. "We need to talk," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Now." She guided me with the firm pressure of someone accustomed to directing traffic, steering us away from the crowd toward a quiet hallway inside the estate's main building. The stone corridor was lined with oil paintings of the vineyard's founders, their stern faces seeming to judge the family drama unfolding beneath their gaze. Father followed close behind, his face flushed with something that wasn't entirely from the wine. The moment we were out of earshot, Mother released my arm and whirled to face me. "What the hell was that?" Her voice was low but venomous, the polished veneer stripped away to reveal the fury beneath. "You deliberately humiliated us in front of everyone." I stared at her, genuinely confused. "I humiliated you?" Quote. "Don't play innocent," Father interjected, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he'd used during my childhood lectures. "You orchestrated this whole thing, bringing some judge here to make us look like fools." "I didn't bring her," I said quietly. "I didn't even know she was coming." "Bullshit," Mother snapped. "You never told us about any of this. Federal cases, legal frameworks. You let us believe you were nobody, and then you ambush us with this performance." The word performance hit like a slap. I felt something shift inside me, a tectonic plate that had been building pressure for years finally reaching its breaking point. "When exactly was I supposed to tell you?" My voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it now. "During the family dinners I wasn't invited to? The Christmas celebrations where you forgot to call? Or maybe during one of the birthday parties you never mentioned I was having?" Mother's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare turn this around on us. We're your family." "You never asked," I interrupted, the words cutting through her protest like a knife through silk. "In 3 years, neither of you has asked me a single question about my work, my life, or whether I was happy. You decided who I was based on who you wanted me to be, and when I didn't fit that mold, you wrote me off." Father stepped forward, his jaw tight. "We gave you every opportunity to succeed. If you chose to throw it away—" "I didn't throw anything away," I said, my voice finally rising. "I built something meaningful. I helped create laws that protect people who risk everything to tell the truth about corruption. I spent 2 years of my life working 18-hour days to make sure pension funds stolen from teachers and firefighters could be recovered." "Then why didn't you tell us?" Mother demanded. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with years of hurt and misunderstanding. Around the corner, I could hear the distant sound of laughter and clinking glasses, the wedding celebration continuing without us. "Because you never asked," I repeated, but softer this time, "and because I finally realized that nothing I accomplished would ever be enough to earn what I really wanted from you." "Which is what?" Father's voice was defensive now, uncertain. "Your love without conditions, your pride without performance, your presence without having to pay for it." The silence that followed was deafening. I walked away from them then, my footsteps echoing in the stone hallway like a final punctuation mark. Behind me, I heard Mother call my name, but it sounded hollow, desperate, the voice of someone who just realized they'd lost something they didn't know they valued. The evening air felt cool against my skin as I stepped back onto the terrace. The reception continued its orchestrated dance, but I moved through it like a ghost, no longer part of the performance. Guests who had ignored me an hour earlier now watched with curious eyes, some approaching with tentative smiles and business cards, suddenly eager to know the federal prosecutor they'd overlooked. I declined their invitations politely, my mind already elsewhere. "Ethan," Chloe's voice stopped me near the edge of the terrace. She stood silhouetted against the string lights, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled moonlight. Her makeup was carefully repaired, but I could still see the traces of tears in her eyes. "I was looking for you," she said, her voice small in a way that reminded me of childhood confessions shared in blanket forts. "Beautiful wedding," I said, meaning it. "You look radiant." She stepped closer, something crumpled in her hand. "I found this in my old room when I was packing for the honeymoon." She held out a piece of construction paper, faded and wrinkled with age. "Do you remember?" I took it gently, recognizing immediately the crayon drawing we'd made together when she was 8 and I was 12. 2 stick figures standing under a rainbow, holding hands. At the bottom, in her careful child's handwriting, "Ethan and Chloe forever." "You kept this?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I kept everything," she whispered. Every drawing, every story you told me, every time you let me win at checkers, even though I knew you were better." Her voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry I stopped being your sister somewhere along the way." I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that she'd been a child caught between conflicting loyalties, that I understood the impossible position she'd been placed in. Instead, I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope I'd carried all day. "I wrote this for you last night," I said, placing it in her hands. Everything I wanted to say but couldn't figure out how to. She clutched it against her chest like a lifeline. "Will I see you again?" Quote. The question hung between us, weighted with years of missed opportunities and roads not taken. I touched her cheek gently, the way I used to when she'd had nightmares. "Be happy, Chloe. That's all I ever wanted for you." "Ethan, wait." But I was already walking away, past the reception tables and through the vineyard rows toward the parking area. Behind me, the celebration continued, but I felt lighter with each step, as if I was finally walking towards something instead of away from it. "Ethan!" Aunt Lillian's voice called out from behind me. I turned to find her hurrying across the gravel, her heels clicking with determination. When she reached me, she wrapped me in a fierce hug that smelled of lavender and stubborn love. "You did good, kid," she whispered into my ear. "You did real good." 3 weeks later, I stood in my apartment kitchen, brewing the same black coffee that had started countless mornings, but everything felt different. The silence that had once felt lonely now felt peaceful, the quiet of a life chosen rather than endured. My phone buzzed constantly in the days following the wedding. Text messages from family members I hadn't heard from in years, suddenly eager to reconnect now that they understood my true worth. Voicemails from Mother, her tone cycling through anger, confusion, and what might have been regret. Father's single message was characteristically brief. "We should talk." I left them all unread, unanswered, not out of spite, but out of clarity. They hadn't reached out because they missed me, or because they'd realized their mistake. They'd reached out because a federal judge had told them I was worth something, and they wanted to renegotiate the terms of our relationship, based on external validation. But I was done living my life according to their metrics. The letter I'd written to Chloe remained unanswered, and I found peace in that too. I'd said what needed saying, that I loved her, that I was proud of the woman she'd become, and that I hoped she'd find the courage to live authentically rather than performatively. Whether she chose to reach out wasn't something I could control. On a quiet Saturday morning, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I walked to the spare bedroom that doubled as my home office and pulled out a canvas and acrylic paints I'd bought on impulse but never used. Law had always been about words, logic, arguments built like architectural structures. But sitting there with a brush in my hand, I found myself painting the view from my apartment window. The city skyline, the morning light, the ordinary beauty of a life lived quietly but deliberately. It wasn't particularly good, but it was mine. My laptop chimed with a new email. The sender made me smile. Judge Lorraine Bennett. "Ethan," it read, "I hope you don't mind my impromptu appearance at the wedding. Sometimes the people who care about us need to see us through different eyes to recognize what was always there. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. And I wanted to make sure you knew that your worth isn't contingent on anyone else's recognition. Your next case file is on my desk when you're ready. The world needs people like you. LB." I read the message twice, then closed the laptop. Outside my window, the city moved with its usual weekend rhythm. Somewhere in those streets were people fighting for justice, whistleblowers gathering courage, families learning to love without conditions. There was work to be done, cases to build, laws to craft that would protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. But first I had a painting to finish, and a life to live that belonged entirely to me. I picked up my brush and continued painting, no longer the family embarrassment, no longer the overlooked son, but simply Ethan. Enough, exactly as I was. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.